His gaze hit me like an arrow when I opened the door to apartment 307. It was like time froze for 2 seconds as our eyes met for the first time. Christopher Kane, 29 years old, my new apartment mate. "You're Jackson, right? Sorry about the mess. I just brought in the last boxes." His voice was deeper than I had imagined over the phone, with a soft accent that I couldn't immediately place. "Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this." I dropped my bags in the hallway and reached out, trying not to show just how nervous I felt. At 26, after 5 years of living on my own, sharing a place with someone was a huge step for me. "Absolutely. Don't worry about the mess. I've got plenty of my own stuff to sort out too." The apartment was even better than the online photos. Spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the living room with natural light and offered a partial view of the city. The open kitchen was modern, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Christopher had set his moving boxes in one corner, trying to minimize the disruption. "Want me to show you your room? I picked the smaller one since I got here first, but it has a pretty cool walk-in closet to make up for it." At that moment, I couldn't have imagined how that apartment would become the backdrop for the most intense emotional turmoil of my life. My routine quickly settled into that new space. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., work remotely as a software developer until late afternoon, and then usually head out for a run in the park near our building. Christopher kept more irregular hours as a freelance photographer. Sometimes he'd leave before dawn to catch the perfect light, and other times he would spend entire days in his room editing photos. On nights when our schedules overlapped at home, I discovered that Christopher was surprisingly great company. He would prepare elaborate meals while telling me stories about his trips photographing landscapes across the country. I'd help by chopping vegetables, or just sit at the kitchen counter, watching him move confidently around the space, occasionally running his hand through his dark hair when he focused on a particular detail. "Do you always cook like that for all your roommates?" I asked one night, as he served up a mushroom risotto that filled the entire apartment with its aroma. "Actually, you're my first roommate since college. But yeah, cooking is my therapy." He smiled, his green eyes lighting up in the glow of the pendant light over the kitchen island. That incident, 47 days after my move, changed everything. One Thursday night, with the doorbell ringing repeatedly just after midnight, I found Christopher at the door, visibly shaken, clutching his camera with almost too much care. "I got mugged. They took my backpack with all the memory cards from the National Geographic project." His voice was hoarse, controlled. "I only managed to save the camera." That night, after filing an online police report and calling the insurance company, we sat on the balcony with 2 beers. I watched Christopher process the loss of weeks of work, his frustration slowly morphing into resignation. Without thinking, I put my hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. "You know what's worse? Those photos were really special, not just for the work, but they had captured something I can't really explain." His voice faltered for a moment. The following weeks brought us unexpectedly closer. I helped Christopher rebuild his portfolio, and we spent hours side by side at my computer salvaging what we could from partial backups. Our conversations stretched well into the early hours, wandering from photography to childhood dreams, failed relationships, and professional fears. One night, while we were watching a documentary in the darkened living room, I realized I was counting the inches between our bodies on the couch. I wondered if he noticed how tense I became whenever our arms brushed by accident. Christopher had mentioned exes in previous conversations, and I had respectfully kept my bisexuality silent, afraid it might complicate our living situation. Every little gesture made the internal conflict grow. The way he rested his hand on my back as he passed me in the narrow corridor. How sometimes his eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than necessary. Was I reading meaning into nothing? Or was there something more happening? The uncertainty consumed me as I tried to unravel the mystery that was Christopher Kane. One Tuesday night, when an electric storm turned Seattle into a symphony of lights and sounds, everything shifted. The power went out throughout the whole building, and we found ourselves in the living room lit only by candles that Christopher had strategically placed around the space. His face, partially hidden by shadows, looked different, more vulnerable, perhaps. "Want to play a game?" he asked, shaking a bottle of whiskey in my direction. Truth or Dare, adult version. My heart started racing. I sat down on the carpet in front of him, legs crossed as he poured 2 generous shots. "The rules are simple," Christopher explained, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. "We answer honestly or drink the whole shot. No half-truths." We started with harmless questions. First job, worst date, embarrassing moments of our youth. But after the 3rd round, I felt the whiskey loosening my usual defenses. Christopher, too, seemed more relaxed, his body leaning slightly towards me with every new question. "What was your last serious relationship?" he asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I hesitated. "With a guy named Ethan. We broke up almost 2 years ago." I saw his eyebrows raise slightly, but his face stayed neutral. "I didn't know you were gay." "Bisexual, actually," I corrected, studying his reaction. "I never mentioned it because, well, it's not always easy to know how people will react." Christopher nodded slowly. "Makes sense. My turn now?" I took a deep breath. "Have you ever felt attracted to another man?" The silence that followed felt endless. Christopher looked down at his glass, then at the flickering flame of the nearest candle. For a moment, I thought he was just going to drink, dodging the answer. "Yes," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "More than once." The air between us grew thick, charged with unsaid possibilities. We continued playing, but now every question carried an unmistakable subtext. By the time the power came back on, around 2 in the morning, we were sitting much closer, our legs nearly touching. "I guess we should go to sleep," Christopher murmured, even though he made no move to get up. "Probably," I agreed, equally motionless. Our eyes met and held. Something silent was communicated in that moment. A kind of permission, a mutual curiosity. Christopher leaned in almost imperceptibly, and my body responded on its own. When our faces were just inches apart, the shrill sound of his phone shattered the quiet. He pulled back as if he'd been shocked, checked the screen, and mumbled something about a client trying to reschedule a photo session. The moment was gone, and soon we both headed to our separate rooms, leaving unanswered questions lingering in the empty living room. The following days turned into a stretch of cautious proximity. We exchanged glances that lasted a second too long, found excuses to be in the same space, yet always kept a safe distance. I began noticing details about Christopher that I'd previously ignored. How he nibbled his lower lip when concentrating, the scent of his aftershave lingering in the bathroom after his morning shower, the surprisingly delicate way his photographer's fingers handled everyday objects. One Saturday afternoon, while I was working on my laptop at the kitchen table, Christopher walked in carrying his photography gear. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with the straps of his camera bag as he spoke. "I got an offer for a solo exhibition at the Westlake Gallery," he announced, a mix of pride and apprehension in his voice. "But I need some new photos, something more personal." "That's amazing, Chris. Congratulations." I shut my laptop, genuinely happy for him. "Thanks," he replied with a shy smile. "Actually, I was thinking, would you mind being my model?" The proposal caught me completely off guard. "Me? I'm not exactly model material, you know." Christopher laughed, visibly relaxing. "It's not that kind of photography. I want to capture people in their personal spaces, moments of authenticity. You'd be perfect." I agreed, more out of curiosity than vanity. That very afternoon, Christopher turned my room into an impromptu studio. Following his instructions, I alternated between reading a book in bed, working on my computer, and gazing out of the window. Everyday activities that somehow felt incredibly intimate under his observant lens. "Try to relax," he directed, adjusting his camera's focus. "Forget I'm even here." But how could I ignore his presence when every nerve in my body was painfully aware of him? Christopher moved through the room with cat-like grace, occasionally touching my shoulder or arm to adjust a pose, each contact sending electric shocks over my skin. After almost 2 hours, he lowered his camera and sat at the edge of my bed, scrolling through the photos on the digital screen. I sat beside him, our shoulders brushing lightly as we looked over the images. "You have a look that the camera loves," he commented, pausing on a photo where I was staring directly into the lens, an expression filled with vulnerable intensity that I didn't even know I possessed. "That's because I've got a good photographer," I replied, turning to face him. At that moment, the space between us seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension. His eyes dropped to my lips for a fleeting second before meeting my gaze again. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he set the camera aside and turned fully towards me. "Jackson," his voice was husky. I can't stop thinking about that night during the blackout. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. Neither can I. This time, there were no interruptions. Christopher closed the gap between us, his hand finding the back of my neck as his lips captured mine in a tentative kiss that quickly grew more urgent. Years of repressed curiosity seemed to fuel every move, his hands exploring my face, my hair, my shoulders, as if trying to memorize every detail by touch. I responded with equal intensity, pulling him closer until we were completely lying on my bed. His weight over mine was delicious, solid and real after weeks of bottled-up imagination and desire. When we finally pulled apart to catch our breath, his eyes were dark with longing, his pupils dilated almost to the point of eclipsing the green. "I never," he began, his voice trembling. "It's okay," I whispered against his lips. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." Christopher pressed his forehead against mine, eyes closed as he absorbed his emotions. "I want everything. I just don't know how." "I can show you," I offered, reversing our positions with a smooth movement until I was on top of him. "We can take it slow." What started as a cautious exploration soon turned into something more primal. I unbuttoned his shirt slowly, revealing inch by inch of skin that my lips reverently followed. Christopher shuddered under my touch, small sounds of pleasure escaping his throat as I discovered the sensitive spots along his neck, his chest, the space between his ribs. His hands, initially tentative, grew more confident, sliding under my t-shirt, tracing warming lines along my back. In a surprisingly agile move, he tugged the fabric over my head, his eyes roaming my exposed torso with an intensity that almost felt tangible. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his hands exploring every contour, every plane of my body, as though he were creating a tactile map. The rest of our clothes gradually disappeared too, every new reveal accompanied by kisses and bolder touches. Christopher's initial inexperience was more than made up for by his attention to detail. He watched my reactions carefully, quickly learning what gave me pleasure. When we finally became one completely, the outside world seemed to vanish. There was only us, moving together in a rhythm that was both ancient and entirely new. Christopher clung to me as if he was afraid I might disappear, his face buried in my neck, his warm breath against my skin. "Jackson," he whispered my name like a prayer, a confession, a revelation. I lost track of time as our bodies communicated in a language older than words. The pleasure built like a wave, growing and growing until we were both carried away by it, trembling in each other's arms, names whispered against damp skin. Later, lying side by side and staring at the ceiling as our breathing normalized, I felt a vulnerability that went beyond physical nakedness. Christopher remained silent, an arm draped over his eyes, and for a terrible moment, I feared regret. "Are you okay?" I finally asked, turning to look at him. He removed the arm from his face and turned to meet my gaze. To my relief, a small smile played on his lips. "I'm just trying to process how I spent 29 years never realizing what I was missing," he said, reaching out to trace the contours of my face with his fingertips. I laughed softly, relaxing under his touch. "So, no regrets then?" His expression turned serious. "None. But I'm a bit scared by the intensity of what I feel." I intertwined my fingers with his, bringing his hand to my lips. "Me too." We stayed like that for hours, alternating between whispered conversations, moments of thoughtful silence, and renewed explorations of our bodies. The room darkened as day gave way to night, but neither of us mentioned turning on the lights or leaving that space where everything had changed. In the darkness, Christopher admitted that he'd always known, on some level, that he was attracted to men, but he'd never allowed himself to explore those feelings. He talked about growing up in a small conservative town, about family expectations and the fear of disappointment. He spoke about relationships with women that always somehow felt incomplete in an inexplicable way. I shared my own struggles with identity, The years of denial followed by the painful process of self-acceptance. I talked about broken hearts and revelations, about learning to navigate a world that doesn't always understand nuances. When the dawn finally began to filter through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft golden light, I looked at Christopher sleeping beside me. His peaceful face in sleep looked younger, the constant worry lines softened. I realized that I had crossed a line of no return, not only physically, but emotionally too. At some point during those weeks of living together, I had fallen for my so-called heterosexual roommate. Now, as I watched the rising sun paint patterns on his skin, I wondered what this new day would bring for us. The physical closeness had been extraordinary, but I knew from experience that morning often brought clarity and at times regret. Was this just an exploratory phase for Christopher, a curiosity satisfied? Or were we standing on the threshold of something deeper, something more permanent? With these thoughts whirling in my mind, I closed my eyes, letting myself fall asleep beside him once again, knowing that when we woke, we'd have to face the reality of what we had started. I woke up alone, with the impression of Christopher's body still visible on the mattress next to me. The apartment was silent, except for the distant sound of running water from the bathroom. I sat on the bed, a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The euphoria from the night before was giving way to uncertainty. Would the Christopher after that revelation be the same man with whom I shared my bed? I dressed in sweatpants and a simple t-shirt, trying to look casual while my mind rehearsed dozens of possible scenarios for our next meeting. When I went into the kitchen, I found a hastily written note. I had an emergency photo session. I'll be back in the afternoon. We need to talk. See, we need to talk. 4 words that rarely signal something good. I spent the next few hours in a state of agitation, switching between replaying our moments together and trying to distract myself with work. Nothing worked. At 3 in the afternoon, I heard the key in the lock and forced myself to remain seated on the couch, pretending to be absorbed in my laptop. Christopher came in carrying 2 coffees and a small paper bag. His eyes met mine immediately, and to my relief, he smiled. A shy but genuine smile. I brought those blueberry muffins you like, he said, setting the items on the coffee table. Thank you. I closed the laptop, accepting the coffee he offered. How was the session? Cancelled, actually. Christopher sat in the armchair opposite the couch, maintaining a distance that seemed deliberate. I needed some time to think. The knot in my stomach tightened. About last night. Yeah. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I now recognized as a sign of nervousness. Jackson, what happened was amazing, eye-opening even. But it's also a little scary. I nodded, waiting for him to continue, afraid to interrupt his train of thought. I've spent my whole life building up an image of who I thought I should be, he continued, staring into his coffee as if the answers were written in the foam. And in one night, that version completely crumbled. I understand more than you might think, I finally replied. It's not easy facing something you've hidden from yourself for so long. Christopher looked up, his eyes meeting mine with renewed intensity. The problem is, I don't know what this means for me, for my identity. I always considered myself straight with just a few, occasional thoughts I brushed aside. But now, you don't need to label anything right now, I offered. Or ever if you don't want to. He managed a sad smile. The world loves labels, doesn't it? But you're right. What worries me most is... He hesitated, taking a sip of coffee to buy time. What does this mean for us? For the way we live together? The question I had been dreading. What do you want it to mean? Christopher set his cup down and stood, walking over to the window. With his back to me, his silhouette outlined against the afternoon light, he seemed to be gathering courage. I have a trip booked to Alaska, he finally said. A 3-week project photographing the northern lights that I planned months ago. I leave next Monday. It felt like a punch. It was an escape then, a convenient getaway. I understand, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. You need space. He spun around abruptly. No, that's not it. He walked over to me and, to my surprise, knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. I want you to come with me. I blinked, stunned. What? I have 2 tickets, he explained, the words tumbling out quickly as if he feared losing his nerve. I originally planned to ask my brother, but he can't go. And after last night, Jackson, I don't want to run away from this, whatever it is. I want to explore this part of me that I've kept hidden for so long, and I want to do it with you. The proposal was so unexpected that I was momentarily speechless. 3 weeks, just the 2 of us, isolated in one of the most remote and beautiful places on the planet. I'm not promising anything but honesty, Christopher continued, squeezing my hands. I don't know where this is heading, what I exactly feel, or how I'll feel tomorrow. All I know is I've never felt as alive as I did last night, and I'm scared of losing that if I don't dive in headfirst now. Something in his vulnerability disarmed my last defenses. My boss is going to kill me if I ask for 3 weeks off on such short notice. A hopeful light spread across Christopher's face. Is that a yes? I pulled him close, our lips meeting in a kiss that answered his question better than any words. When we broke apart, I smiled against his mouth. I'll try. The following days were a flurry of preparations. To my surprise, my boss approved the time off. You've had vacation days piling up for 2 years, Jackson. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you this long to ask. Christopher and I spent our evenings researching Alaska, buying the necessary equipment, and inevitably exploring this new dimension of our relationship. Each night together revealed new aspects of the other. Christopher became more confident, more exploratory, his initial hesitation giving way to an almost insatiable curiosity. We'd talk for hours after each intimate encounter, sharing stories, fears, and hopes that we'd never voiced before. The night before our departure, as we lay in his bed wrapped in the quiet after intimacy, Christopher traced invisible patterns on my chest as he spoke. I called my parents today, he said softly. I told them about the trip. You told them about me too? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual despite the tension I felt. He sighed. Not really. I said I was taking a friend. I'm just not ready for that conversation yet, especially over the phone. I nodded, understanding his reasons even though I felt a twinge of disappointment. No pressure. Everyone has their own timing. Christopher rested on one elbow, looking directly into my eyes. But I want you to know I'm not ashamed of this, of us. I'm just processing. Everything happened so fast. 2 months isn't exactly fast for getting to know someone, I observed with a small smile. 2 months living together, yes. Less than a week as whatever we are now. He bit his lip tentatively. What are we now, Jackson? The question hung between us, charged with possibilities and unspoken expectations. We're 2 people discovering something special together, I finally replied. We don't need to label it any further right now. Christopher seemed to relax, leaning in to plant a soft kiss on my lips. Thanks for understanding, for being patient with me. That early morning, while Christopher slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake thinking about the leap of faith we were about to take. 3 weeks isolated in Alaska could solidify what we had started building, or reveal incompatibilities that our initial passion had masked. There was also the fear that, for Christopher, this might just be a phase, a curious experiment that would eventually send him back to the heterosexuality he'd always identified with. But as I looked at his serene face in sleep, I felt a certainty that went beyond my insecurities. No matter the outcome, it was worth the risk. We had found something rare, a connection that went beyond the physical, a mutual understanding that grew with every conversation, every glance, every touch. Sometimes, love starts in the most unexpected places, like sharing an apartment with a stranger who, through small daily moments, becomes the person you most want to know in the world. Our story was just beginning, written in stolen glances, hesitant touches, and whispered promises in the dark. And I couldn't wait to turn the next page. If you've ever felt that inexplicable connection with someone who turned your world upside down, leave your like and subscribe. Share your unexpected love story in the comments. And remember, sometimes the best stories start when you least expect them, with people you never imagined.